Okay, welcome to the Engineers HVAC Podcast, where our mission is to empower and educate the HVAC community. This podcast is brought to you by Insight Partners and Hobbs and Associates, two commercial HVAC rep firms. I'm Tony Mormino and your host. And for today, we're going to be discussing a very important and often overlooked aspect of the commercial HVAC business, and that is HVAC parts. And fortunately, I have a parts guru. We got to start give you a nickname, Justin, like Dr. Parts or something like that.
Yeah.
HVAC parts. But Justin's been in the business a long time. He's going to kind of help me go through this and talk about parts. Justin, why don't we give the audience a little introduction, who you are, who you work for, your history, and that kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me, Tony. I'm Justin Betz. I work for Energy Transfer Solutions. We're based in Westchester, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. We're a full-service manufacturer's rep firm representing a ton of different HVAC brands in the PA, New Jersey, Delaware market. And my role is to work with the aftermarket and the parts team. So anything, once the equipment ships, anything that those units ever need at any point in their life cycle is going to usually come across my desk. So I sort of live and breathe the HVAC parts world every day.
You're in a world of, I need it yesterday, I'm assuming.
Yep.
That's how no one calls and said, hey, I need this part, but take your time. Just get it to me when you can.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because we've been doing this podcast for a couple of years now. We've never really talked about parts. And you and I were talking the other day. I was like, wow, what a great topic to cover. And I thought we would start. So most of our listeners are mechanical engineers, mechanical contractors, some building owners as well, mostly in the commercial areas where our listeners follow. And I don't think, like, from an engineer's standpoint and even from an owner's standpoint, when they're starting to decide on who we're going to have as the basis of design, like they get with the owner, I don't think parts really ever enters into the equation, but I think it kind of should. Like, what is your recommendation to, okay, we're going to lay out this hospital. If parts is going to be part of the consideration, what should they be thinking about in terms of parts?
Yeah. So, being on the parts side, we see a real different side of the business than what the sales engineers and the architects and the GCs, what they see. We have different customers that might work for the same companies, but it's totally different worlds. So my advice would be, once you, as the engineer, have sort of laid out who's going to be your BOD or who your alternates are, start thinking to yourself, who's going to be the one to maintain this equipment? If it's specialized, does that contractor know how to maintain that type of equipment? And these are probably already questions you ask, but the next step in that evolution is, what options exist to source the parts for that equipment? Is it manufactured in America? Is there a parts warehouse or a factory here in the United States? So I would say, ask that sales engineer that's asking you to specify their brand of equipment, what personal parts are you stocking in your facility? Do you have enough parts to, get us through an emergency? And if you don't, what type of parts do the manufacturers carry, that's close by? Or does the manufacturer make their own parts? So if you call on a Monday, you can get it out the next day? Or are they beholden to somebody overseas? And if it's not on a container ship already, good luck. So that's usually what I would say.
Yeah, that's a good point. And this is a great contrast, because I've always been on the sales engineering side primarily, and you're on the parts side. And, for people listening, there's all different flavors of equipment reps. There's the one guy who works out of his house who may be repping a product that is made overseas. Then there's the sales engineer that works for a company that has a parts warehouse actually in the immediate area. So it runs the gamut, right? I was part of a part owner of a rep firm in Jacksonville, and we had a parts area in the back where we had the 50 most common, easy replaceable parts. And then we would overnight stuff if we needed to. But it's nice to go to a counter and have a guy there that's got the parts in stock, especially if you're an office space, maybe not be that major of a deal, but like if you're a hospital or a data center or something, that's a major problem, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard enough to get the sale the first time. The last thing you want to do is like lose the opportunity to keep it in the future because you can't support the brand that you sold. And it's going to give the engineer specifying a bad time too if the end user doesn't feel good about the product they were sold. If somebody's not doing their due diligence to pick the brand that, because in Illinois, that might be a totally different conversation than what it is here in Philly. Our brands that do really well here, they might not have as strong of a foothold out there. So it is going to be a little location dependent according to, what reps are in your area and who's out there working for it.
Yeah. And it just, as you were talking, I've got some questions here, but feel free to veer off and go into, down any rabbit hole we need to, if it's bringing value to everybody. But I was thinking of one of the things I didn't have on here is a spare parts list, like how important that could be if you're a critical facility, right?
Yep. Yeah. So we see that occasionally that part of the bid will be, to provide spare parts, but it's usually pretty vague. You can, as the person putting together the bid, it might say, please provide critical spare parts. And to somebody that might just be a belt, but to somebody that does it every day, that might be a controller. It might be some pressure switches. It might be a condenser fan motor. I think it could vary. And it can get expensive. At what point do you draw the line? One of the things that we've tried to do is, we're going to talk about warranty at some point today, I'm sure. But even when your equipment comes with a warranty, if you keep spare parts on hand, or if you work with a rep that has spare parts on hand and you have a condenser fan motor go bad, you either already have that condenser fan motor on your shelf and then that is replaced by your warrantable replacement, or the rep can get you one tomorrow. They file the warranty claim, that motor comes and replaces their stock level, their inventory. So just because you have warranty doesn't mean that spare parts don't play a big part in the conversation. It's just about being prepared more than anything.
And it's all over the place. You're right. To somebody, a belt is a spare part, emergency spare part. And to somebody else, like a hospital, it could be 20 different things. And I think it's important too, on the way we were talking about like the front end, to make sure you define that. Or if you have equipment in the field now, go to the OEM manufacturer and say, hey, what do you recommend? What are the 3 tiers of spare parts? This is, not very critical. Like if you want to make sure you're up 99% of the time, here's a list of 20 things you need or whatever. Right. So we can help. You can help with that. But, you talked about warranties. Maybe that's a good segue into warranties. I think warranties are confusing to a lot of folks, even some contractors who we do business with, constantly. There's the labor warranty and then the parts warranty. What is your experience with typical warranties, and how do they get fulfilled? And touch on that for us.
Yeah. So, warranties can be a very gray area. If it's not defined, people are going to take liberties where they want to take liberties. I usually would say a warranty is only as good as the installation or the company representing the brand. We have a lot of brands that have 1-year warranties, and anything outside of that costs extra. And then we have other brands that have 10-year warranties right off the bat. And one or the other may not necessarily be the right answer. The right answer is the least amount of downtime possible. Like you mentioned, you want to be up, 99.9% of the time. Failures are inevitable. They're going to happen, whether the equipment engineers like to admit that or not. Right. Everybody here in parts and service, we wouldn't exist, right, if they weren't. So failures are inevitable. There's no sense in not talking about it. I'd rather have the reliable equipment, even if it's a shorter warranty than something, like we mentioned earlier, is newer or is overseas as their manufacturer, or they're just not a very established brand. I don't want to be the kink that they have to work out while they're learning how that goes. And like you mentioned, most of the time, you're not going to see a labor warranty that often. And I think one of the disconnects we found is that even though the end user may realize that it's a parts only warranty and that there's no labor warranty involved, there seems to be a disconnect where the end user is expecting the labor to install that warrantable part be subsidized, be reduced, be reasonable. And the contractor on the other side is saying, this part's warranty, I'm not going to be able to put any markup on that part that I usually would. And so they might even have a higher labor cost than they would otherwise for that same repair. So you have sort of that lose-lose situation where if you don't get that out front and kind of talk to the owner of the building and the engineer and the sales engineer, everybody involved doesn't talk about what the expectation is, you know, people get the wrong idea. So we can kind of see where all that breakdown, and we see all the breakdown, the miscommunication, the lack of clarity. We're the ones that unfortunately deliver that bad news sometimes. But the warranty fulfillment in general is relatively straightforward. It comes down to if the unit's been registered, which can be another topic of common misconception. Folks automatically assume, that a unit is registered for warranty, and most factories have, the minute it ships, you have some sort of a catch-all safety, right, for some warranty, whether it's 1 year or 18 months or whatever it might be. They're going to take care of you from the minute it ships. But for any of those extended periods of warranty, usually they require, paperwork, data readings, some sort of startup or commissioning. And we've seen, that can get, the ball can get dropped on that at all the levels, really. And it leads to the only person that really is hurt by it is the owner of the building. And, then eventually everybody gets hurt by it because it comes back on everybody, the engineer that specified it, the company that sold the equipment, the installing contractor, the service contractor. So getting the actual warranty registered and following the manufacturer's guidelines can be, make or break for you.
Yeah, and those situations are never fun, like you said. No one wants their equipment to go down, especially if it's relatively new. That's really not a fun typical scenarios. If you go to start up the unit, there's a problem. We take care of it as the manufacturer's rep. That's pretty common, I think, across the board. But it's the after 3 months, man, the motor failed or something like that, which doesn't happen very often with a motor, but things do. Still looking for that perfect piece of equipment to sell, right? Like there's every brand I've repped has problems. Like this is mechanical equipment. It does take a beating a lot of times, especially a lot of the stuff we sell, DOAS systems and things like that. And then there's, the warranties. I wanted to touch on there are different types of parts warranty. Like some start when the unit leaves the factory, like a lot of compressor warranties are like that. Some parts they start at 12 months from startup, or 18 months, whatever comes first, 12, 18 warranty. Am I saying that right? Something like that. So, those are always kind of areas like, where are we at? So you got to pay attention to that too. Some folks will want, the engineers will write in their spec, it has to be 12 months from startup. Well, if it sits there for 8 months, then it doesn't qualify. You have to go through and write paperwork, and it gets murky, like you said. So, so that's good. Thanks for touching on that. So why don't we talk a little bit about I grew up, my dad was in residential HVAC. So I grew up with him, like going around to parts houses, and I noticed there's a difference in part houses. Some of them are pretty chummy. Like you get to know these people real well if you go to a parts house where the guy, you know what I'm saying? Like people come in, they'll sit in the counter, they'll have a coffee or whatever. At least that's what it was a billion years ago when I went around with my dad. And I see some of that today, but there's different flavors of, part support. Like there's guys who know their stuff, and there's people, like if I was doing parts, I would know how to look it up in the catalog. I'd have a general feel, but I couldn't say, hey, when you install this, make sure you check the and when you're programming this. So talk about a little bit about parts expertise, how it varies, benefits, pros and cons, things like that.
Yeah. So, being the manufacturer's rep, we represent about 30 brands. And so we expect ourselves, and we're expected to be the experts at parts for those 30 brands. So, some of our brands can get pretty complicated, the VRF and some of the DOAS, like you mentioned. So it comes down to, there's different types of contractors. Some of them specialize in controls and specialize in, large chillers, and then some of them specialize in VRF. And it's the same thing with parts and supplies. You have those counters that are great when grandmom's furnace breaks. Those are the guys you want to go see because they have 75 different inducer motors and every sort of gas valve you could possibly need, but they don't know the first thing about getting you a part for a cooling tower. They would say, what is that?
Interesting.
So we've definitely
they're talking about I'm not going to name any names, but the big box parts warehouses. So they have their place for I see what you're saying. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So there's definitely different flavors for different people.
Hmm.
We've tried to be the experts at the brands we represent, and then part of our mission at Energy Transfer is to you never say no to any parts opportunity. So we have certain
Hmm.
customers that will come to us for brands we don't represent because we've made connections and we've opened accounts with a lot of factories that we don't technically represent, but we're still able to provide their factory direct parts. And
Hmm.
that's fulfilling for us because it gives us a chance to increase our customer base, increase our order opportunity, gives us something different than doing the same old thing every single day. But there's definitely experts at each brand. And if you're working on a specific brand, you want to at least know who that expert is, even if you don't
Hmm.
necessarily call them every time. It would, pay dividends to at least know who that is in your market. And make sure that you got their number programmed in case you ever need them. It's much easier if you have an existing relationship with a rep or a counter or a supply house to get
Mm.
something quickly and urgently than for the first time to ever be calling these folks. It's a fire drill. You get a little bit more uh, leeway when you've already, been a part of their organization, or if you already have an account, it makes things
Right.
much faster.
You've got
So
history with them. You know who they
exactly.
are. You know they're going to pay for it eventually. You get it to them
Yep.
quick. Why don't you
Hmm.
walk through? Like I didn't have this on the list, but maybe there's folks in here who don't know how a part gets purchased. Like walk us through. I'm a contractor. I get called to a site. I have a contract on this hospital, and there's a big VRF system there, and I need a part. How does that work? They go to the job site and fill in the rest of the story.
Yep. So Tony calls me. I say, "Hey, Tony, what's going on?" He says, "I've got this LG VRF system, and we got this error code going on. And according
Hmm.
to this chart, it says, it's an inverter board error. The VRF system needs a new inverter board." We might ask something like, are you familiar with working on LG VRF? Do you feel comfortable with your diagnosis? Not necessarily, because some people can get offended by that.
Hmm.
But we've realized, especially with some of the niche and the specialty products, that, every now and then
Mm.
I might know enough to help you, as opposed to usually if you call the parts house, you're not getting a service expert. You're getting a person that works in an office that doesn't get their hands dirty. But every now and then we can bring a little value there. So sometimes we'll
Mhm.
have a quick conversation just to make sure that we're on the same page, that they understand what they're looking for. And from there, most of our manufacturers have softwares that we get access to through our logins, and we'll log in, we'll put in a model number, or some of them you search by the serial number, and usually you get a bill of materials. And sometimes it's an exploded view that you can share with the customer and say,
Mm.
it looks like you're looking for this valve here. Is that correct? You can get a little collaboration there to make sure that the part's accurate. And then from there, it's checking availability, see if we have it in our warehouse or how quickly the factory can get it out the door. Usually, most of our customers are in our system already from previous opportunities or previous quotes. And then we just shoot them off a quick note with that part, price, availability, give them all the info. Um, and then once they give us the go ahead, we have our software systems, send the purchase order to the factory or to our warehouse, and then the order is fulfilled and out the door, and usually
Mm.
gets to them a day or two later, depending on the brand that they're looking for.
I'm curious, how many parts are picked up at the counter versus shipped?
You definitely see that trend vary by contractor. So we have
Mhm.
some contractors that'll be like, regional, basically, where they don't just do a city, but they do like 3 states. And so they might have a guy that lives out near, my neck of the woods, and a guy that lives out near your neck of the woods. And so they just ship to their house because for them, time is money, and going to the counter to pick it up
Oh, I see.
would
Yeah.
cost them a lot.
Mhm.
So we see it really vary, but most people prefer these days to get it shipped to their shop or to get it shipped to their house. Every now and then the job site, but people are starting to lean towards not wanting to come to the counter,
Hmm.
if they can get it done over the email or the phone, I think just because it's simpler and easier for them and it's, more convenient. Some of the old school supply houses are still in that mode of, yeah, we'll have it here on Thursday for you. Tony, come pick it up.
Mm-hmm.
And you can ask them to send it to you or whatever, but we see more customers requesting us to ship it rather than come pick it
Yeah,
up.
that makes sense. I mean, I could see if you're on the job's on one side of Philly and you're on the other side, that could be a 4-hour treat,
Yeah.
during some traffic. So yeah, I get
Yeah.
that totally. So cool. Okay, let's talk about OEM versus aftermarket. So OEM stands for
Original equipment manufacturer,
okay.
and aftermarket is something that was not made by the, LG or Daikin, something that was made generally by a third party company that exists to try to provide replacement parts that
Mhm.
aren't that name brand. Um, so, as a manufacturer's rep, our goal is to sell OEM parts, but there's this interesting thing that's happened where most of the people in this industry are technically part of the aftermarket parts group because it's kind of just considered anything after that unit ships, it's considered aftermarket, even if the parts OEM, that whole genre is sort of after it goes to market.
Oh, I see.
So while there's a time and a place for both OEM and aftermarket. Usually, what I see is like the main difference comes down to value, meaning what do you value more? Do you value your time? Do you value accuracy? Um, you know, does your customer value consistency? If so, you should be looking at OEM parts whenever possible.
Yeah.
If you value material cost above all else, I would still really consider reframing that because you're spending extra time. We had somebody recently come looking for a shiv on an exhaust fan, and with the model and the serial of that exhaust fan, we can pull that shiv, get the information over to the customer, and get it in their hands in a couple hours. Whereas the alternative is to go inside that exhaust fan, open up the cabinet, have the unit off, take a picture in the middle of the dark fan to try to get the picture of
Mm.
that shiv, try to get the dimensions, hope that they're not worn off, and then take that to a supplier or take that to Granger or try to Google it or something. And that can be useful, especially when like a system is very old and it's not supported anymore. But for the most part, um, you know, we really think that there's a lot of value to be found from going to the OEM or the factory rep or the authorized dealer in the area. So
Mhm.
if the cost is really that much of a bother to you, if you really feel like your, rep is just not pricing things according to what you expect or whatever, what we've found is most people don't want to have that tough conversation about price because it's a B2B relationship. We need each other. So people have a hard time saying, Justin, this price is crazy, man. I can't buy this from you. They don't necessarily want to talk about it. Maybe the reason it's crazy is because it's a motor that has to be retrofitted, so a new control board has to be included and a harness. And we didn't discuss that. We didn't touch on
Mhm.
that. Or maybe you just have a rep that isn't pricing their parts correctly. But usually, a good conversation can solve that issue. I always fall back on OEM because I can't tell you how many times people have come and the parts have been changed over time
Yeah.
and they want to come back to us as the rep and say, hey, I've got this LG system or this Evapco cooling tower and we want to do this. And they send us some info on what they have currently and it's not what's supposed to be in there. And
Oh, I see.
so, somebody at one point made the decision to
Mhm.
switch a drive system from this component to this component. And that can all have varying degrees of an effect on something, and it makes it a lot harder for the factory or the part supplier to be able to stand behind what they usually on
Mhm.
OEM. What you're buying is that guarantee that the part we're going to send is guaranteed to be right, and if it's not, you have the full force of our business and the factory. We're going to take care of you. And once you start making changes like that, all those benefits go away. So it's sort
It's
of,
like a domino effect.
yeah, it makes the decision
Yeah.
a lot harder the further you stray away from OEM parts. But I totally understand it's a Saturday at your house and you got to run to Home Depot and get a capacitor for your unit. You got
Sure.
to do what you got to do. But
Yeah.
in the commercial world where things are generally planned in advance, there's usually enough time
Yeah.
to get the right stuff.
Yeah. I was just laughing when you were saying that because I was thinking in my personal life, if it's critical and it's technical and I don't want to do, I'm just like, oh yeah, I'll pay the extra cost. But if it's
Yep.
not, I'll take a risk. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's like it
Yeah.
always seems to be 90% right. And just that little thing doesn't fit or that screws or the holes just not line up perfectly. So I totally get it. So, but for my position would be like if it's a highly technical piece of very expensive AC equipment, you should be getting OEM parts. But I'm a little biased in that. But I just see over time, if you do enough of this, it's definitely you may find something cheaper, but in the long run, you're going to pay because 1 out of 5 of them might not fit just right, or it might break
Mhm.
before it's supposed to. It won't last as long, is what I'm trying to say. But you get
Yep.
what I'm saying there. So, okay. So, from your perspective, what makes a parts distributor stand out in providing value to contractors?
I would say inventory. That's probably the number
Hmm.
one. I don't think you have to have everything, but you have to at least make a decision in what brands are we going to like hang our hat on? What brands are we going to be stocking
Mm,
parts and recommending, and like what brands would we want in our own building because we know we have the ability to supply the products for those brands. There's been a lot of times where um, I've seen customers come back after like a something happened, and we'll talk about a new brand, and somebody in our company will say, I understand you had a problem with this. A brand that we represent that's a competitor in that space would be A, B, or C. And they might say, what kind of parts do you stock for A, B, or C? Because they've been burned by somebody who
mhm.
had a good piece of equipment but had no parts to support it. So I would say inventory is number one. um, Next would probably be what from a standout perspective would be like having that
Mm,
staff with knowledge and the technical
mm,
expertise for those specific pieces of equipment. If you're going to be buying Aon, you want that Aon guy to know what he's doing. And if
mhm.
it's Daikin or whatever it is, you want that. You want to make sure that they have the knowledge at all levels, not just the sales engineer, because the sales engineer isn't going to be taking the call, 2 or 3 years into that unit's life when you have an issue. I mean, they'll eventually get called when there's enough problems on the job. They'll get sent out there to get it straightened out, but you want that first line of defense to also have that knowledge. So
Mhm.
we take a lot of pride in all of our parts folks. None of us are like traditionally HVAC trained. I came from restaurant industry. So I kind of had that hustle of like, you got to get these tables bussed and you got to get these people seated. And it just like, it fit me well for HVAC to have that sense of urgency.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so, our folks they're not HVAC wizards, but they understand the products we sell,
yeah.
and we try to be, there's always changes to this equipment, and you want somebody that lives and breathes the equipment every day and not just going to somebody, um, you know, that doesn't necessarily work with that equipment often. And I think having a training center can go a long way to proving that you're a worthwhile distributor,
Hmm.
worth being specified or chosen. Um, and the one thing that we've seen most of the successful manufacturers reps have, that maybe some of your you know um, smaller distributors or like a counter or a supply house might not necessarily be all involved in, is being very customer service oriented. Because
Mhm.
at the end of the day, a manufacturer's rep firm is just the sales and customer service portion of these factories. So, we represent not just the manufacturer, but we represent you as the customer. So when we sell a piece of equipment and the factory says, I don't see any problem, but we know there's a problem, right? Because we're on the ground floor with you in this. Our service tech was out there doing the startup and there's an issue. We have a responsibility to both sides of the fence to bring it together.
Yeah.
And you don't always find that. A lot of times you find people pick a side, one or the other, and they don't necessarily see what the other side's dealing with. So you have, that's sort of unique to manufacturers reps of being, we have two customers, right? We have the factory as a customer, because if we're not selling enough equipment, we're not going to be representing that factory for much longer. And if we're not taking care of the customers in our territories that are buying that equipment, they're not going to buy it from us much longer. So you're constantly focusing on customer service in this business. So I feel like that, that's probably number one. But anyway.
Yeah, no. And you bring up a good point with the training. I didn't even think about that. Like in back to question one, like what should owners and engineers be looking at? Like we've invested in Insight Partners, and I know Hobbs and ETS and a lot of our brands have invested a lot in training. And it's so crucial, like just to be, you get out to the unit and it's down, especially if it's a unit that's complex, like a lot of DOAS units are today or VRF. You gotta know how to troubleshoot, or you're not gonna be able to tell, or you're gonna be just a parts replacer, and we've all seen those stories where the guy's changed 15 parts and he's still, well, that's extreme, but he's changed a couple parts, still can't get it to work right. Whereas the guy who's trained could go out there and say, okay, I know I got to follow this and do this. Okay. It's a sensor, no big deal. Pick up the phone and make the call. So the training is huge, and it's funny. The more you give away, the more you build your brand, the more your business grows. It's a good deal. So, yeah. So you have any direct stories about how having a part, well-stocked part helped the customer out? I know you've probably got a million of them, but
we do have a few of those. Usually what happens, so there's a lot of critical equipment, but probably the most critical equipment that we sell is cooling towers. Even VRF, if one condenser goes down, it's not necessarily going to take down your whole building, usually in our larger installs, but if a cooling tower goes down, it can be pretty massive. So we had a local building here. They had an issue. What happened was their unit was vibrating excessively, and most of these cooling towers now come standard these days with a vibration cutout switch. And somebody was going out there, hitting the reset button and letting the unit continue to run. And it ran to the point where the fan ran into the sidewall of the unit and exploded. So they took out the shaft and the bearings and the fan. And, that was, I want to say, they figured it out at like 8 p.m. They called us. We opened up a little bit early. Our warehouse down in Maryland was able to get all the parts out that same afternoon. And by like 2 p.m., 3 p.m., they were back online. So we get a lot of stuff like that. They're not usually mission critical. It's usually like, I screwed up. I was supposed to order this 2 weeks ago. Can you help me out of a jam? That's usually, most people are more responsible than that, but it happens. And the only way out of that jam is, to have some parts in stock and, to keep up on it. Cause it is, here at our company, it's not really a full-time job to stock the warehouse. Like everybody sort of shares in that responsibility, but it takes a lot of effort to, you have all sorts of responsibilities that go into stock, and you have the accounting side of it, and you have to inventory it, and you have people that need to receive and ship things out, and just trying to get that information spread across an entire company. Most people are using Excel spreadsheets still, and getting that into a software system and working with a rep that has that system sort of working and has invested in that infrastructure can go a long way to a fruitful, engineer to equipment relationship, I think.
Absolutely. 100%. Good stuff. Yeah. You got to be careful when you override those safeties.
Yeah.
They're there for a reason. You were explaining that story and I was like, wow, I hope no one got hurt on that, but it doesn't sound like they did. But I know I've been when I was early in my career, I was delivering a part to a hospital in a chiller room, and they had three like 1,000 ton chillers. It was a big hospital, and I didn't know any better. I thought, well, it was a part for a refrigerant monitor, and I think they had like filters in them or something. I can't remember. It's been a long time, but I went out there to deliver the part, and the guy was on the phone. I'm like, you know what? I'll just change this for him. It's easy. I saw the diagram, and I opened up the refrigerant monitor, and the alarm went off. It triggered the alarm, and the whole plant shut down. He came out of there. He was like, "What the blah blah blah?" You can imagine what he said. But I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, I learned a big lesson. Like, be very careful. What you do out in the field, especially if you're a new guy,
Yeah.
a sales guy. You never know what you're going to trigger or what you're going to override.
Yeah.
But okay, a couple more questions here. This is great information, Justin. By the way, thank you for joining. I think it's. I don't think we talk about parts enough. I think it's hugely important. Okay, so what do you recommend for maintaining a beneficial partnership with a parts supplier to ensure the best outcomes for HVAC products? How can contractors start and or maintain and improve their relationships with the parts counters?
So I think usually that comes down to communication. I know that's like kind of a cop out answer, but I do actually think that a lot of times, like you mentioned, you have parts changers, and we want to help contractors keep their customers and make money, because contractors that keep customers and make money keep coming back, and that grows our business and it grows your business, and it's we all succeed together and we all fail together. Our everybody on my parts team wouldn't be here if contractors didn't keep getting work, and end users didn't keep paying for it. So we want to see you succeed. And sometimes there's not really much communication other than here's what part I need. And sometimes a better way to approach that is, I've been working on this system. I'm seeing this kind of problem. Have you had anybody else that had this kind of problem? And if they did, what was the solution for that problem? And it might be a total goose chase. It might be a waste of time. But it's free advice that we could offer that might save somebody that is in a pickle. Like, you mentioned, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen certain customers will come in for a system, and they'll ask for a compressor and a board, and they'll put it in, and then 3 months later the issues reoccur, and it's not the compressor, it's not the board. The whole time it was a $20, $30, $40 harness or a sensor that was an issue. And so there's not necessarily, and I don't know if it's really the contractor's fault. I think it's a product of the times, right? Some of this equipment's pretty specialized.
Yes.
It can be hard to diagnose. Some of these places have been maintaining these buildings for a long time, and then they get this new equipment, and the building owner thinks, Jimmy's done a fine job. Let's keep it going with Jimmy. And Jimmy's not going to turn down work, right? He's going to take the work.
Right.
And it ends up being a not fruitful relationship for all involved. So that's usually what I say is the best way for contractors to work well with their parts houses is communicate. If you don't like the price on something, I mean, sometimes there's nothing they can do about it, but sometimes there's flexibility, or sometimes there's another avenue or another solution. And the only way to get there really is to talk about it and have that conversation. Because anytime I've had those conversations, even if that particular job didn't, you wouldn't call it a success at the end of the day, all those customers, I would say, are stronger and better relationships now than they were before that conversation. And it does lead to a more productive long-term relationship, I think.
100%. It's something that popped in my head when you were explaining that, because I come from the sales side, and I would try to pride myself on, if you're on a job and you're having a problem, I'd love to help you walk through it. Might even call my service tech if you had a specific question, like, hey, could you help us troubleshoot this thing, right? Because the troubleshooting is 90% of it, right? Getting the right part. And so, get a relationship with not only the parts folks, but your account executive. And, some are more technical than others, but that could be a good avenue to get some support as well. Some rep firms have technical support numbers also. So the training, if someone's in the Philly area and wants to get training, how do they find out when you're doing your training, Justin?
Yeah, so we do training for our biggest training avenue is for our LG VRF, so that you can have the full warranty and kind of understand the installation basics. And I'll give you the info for that you can link here, I'm sure, where they can reach out. But we do classes monthly, and we have, so they rolled this out a few years ago. We have a LG, what you'd call a project manager, who their sole responsibility is to go around to every installation of new LG equipment that we put in the marketplace that comes through our office, and they sign off on the installation being correct. They overlook the startup and the data readings that get taken by our technicians, and they're sort of that higher level tech support. And it's been like a real, I don't want to say 180, because I don't know if it was ever bad, but it's been a huge benefit to us internally and to our customers, I think, to have that person, because it is like for the company, it's a cost, right? That project manager's not selling anything. He's not commissioned. So I think a lot of places have a hard time with that, but I think our leaders realized that you weren't going to grow effectively if you don't help installing contractors install the equipment correctly. So our project manager, Matt, is also the guy that leads our class. So he's great. And we do the class. And if you're interested in LG training specifically, I know there's a ton of reps that offer the training, and some of them offer it online. So that can be a good avenue as well if you're not local to us here.
100%. And I would say, like, take advantage of that VRF project manager. That could save your bacon, on a job. A bad install for a VRF job is not very forgiving, and it involves a lot of troubleshooting and a lot of pain for everybody involved, including the owner who just paid a lot of money for a system. So that's not a thing. And if you get training, send the guys who are going to be actually installing the equipment, not just the office guy. Like, send the wrench turners in there, and get them involved and get them trained up. Because I know from our standpoint, I know you all are the same. Like, we love to train people. Like, we have training all the time, and it's a win-win. One of our core values here is working together, we're stronger, and we truly believe that. Like, when we help build you, it helps everybody. It helps the whole industry. So, okay. So what else is going on with ETS? You guys got a new counter opening up, I understand?
Yep, we do have a new counter. They're building out the office behind me here. So we're going to have a new parts counter with, all the gamuts, some of your general supplies. But what'll be beneficial here is, right now, if you wanted something, it's, our warehouse is dark and dingy, and there's a guy back there that can go get it for you. But now you can swing by anytime that our office is open. We'll have the parts stocked for LG and some of the other brands we represent. So if you're thinking about, specifying VRF in the Philly, Delaware, New Jersey market, all of our sales engineers that are out there calling on these engineers are going to be able to go to those engineers and say, hey, if you were thinking about us versus somebody else, be aware that we have, 1,400 LG parts in stock at our warehouse in Westchester. And if anything happens, it's 30 minutes outside of Philly. Problems can be solved the same day. And that's, it doesn't seem like it would be, that crazy of an idea, but most people just aren't stocking these types of parts because it's relatively still new. VRF has only been really coming around since 2010, 2012. So we're still sort of in that early phase where most places just rely solely on the factory to distribute for them. And then you're beholden to their schedule, you're beholden to their team, fulfilling your stuff. Whereas, we can call, text, and get something taken care of. So we're excited about that.
Excellent. This has been great. And if you're listening, I'll put all these links in the show notes of the podcast, links to ETS's website, so how to find training, how to contact them for parts. Anything else, Justin? Any closing thoughts? Or
no, this has been fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. And again, thank you for joining us. Thank you all for listening. Please share this with somebody if you think you know someone who might benefit from it. And please check out our YouTube channel. Go to YouTube and type in @HVAC-TV. And thank you so much.